Hello and welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. It is Friday, which means my name is Laura Bradburn and I'm joined as always by Tony Haggerty. How you doing, Tony?
I'm very well. Yourself, Laura? How you doing?
Not too bad, and as has become the habit, we're doing a bit of squad rotation this week. No Jim, but we do have Alan Morrison, who you'll know as at Celtic by Numbers on Twitter and one of the contributors to the Huddle Breakdown podcast. How you doing, Alan?
Yeah, very good. Thanks. A bit of a youth team stepping up this Friday.
Well, we'll see how you go. We'll see if you get another chance after this.
I think I qualify as an over 23 player in the youth team.
I quite like being referred to as a youth player, considering I'm going to be 50 this year. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that's not too bad. Not too bad. Thanks everybody for joining us. Plenty to talk about. Obviously, we've got Celtic returning to action. I believe it's on Monday against Hibs, and we're all looking forward to that. So we will touch on that towards the end of the show, but plenty more to discuss. Ange had a lot of comments to make yesterday, which we'll also be touching on as well, especially about, as you can see in the banner, on Riley McGree. But the first thing I wanted to talk about to you guys, and I'll bring up a comment by Sean F, which kind of sort of encompasses it all there, who says, I'm actually glad we didn't get Riley McGree because we lost enough internationals to Japan and also Australia. Hopefully we're looking for another gem in Europe like Jota. Now that's an interesting point, Tony, and I'll come to you first, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about was Dan Orlowitz, friend of the show and writer for the Japan Times, as he is wont to do on Twitter, sometimes lays it out exactly as it is for Celtic fans, was talking about, how the Japan team for the upcoming internationals is going to be picked towards the end of January. And the fact that, if Kyogo's fit, he'll be an instant pick. If he's not fit, then Daisen Maeda will probably be his replacement. Rio Hatate has some chance of being called up, but not a great one, and probably no chance of Ideguchi getting a call up. But it brings to mind the wider question of, with the Australian and Japanese players that we've got, and the amount of travelling they have to do, the amount of internationals they have that are out of sync with the European calendar. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the problems that it can cause us? And do you think it's a real consideration that's made when these players are purchased for us?
We spoke about that the last time Alan was on, didn't we, Alan? About kind of 3 days minimal break and rest time and recuperation time and stuff like that. Of course it's going to cause you problems. But you know that when you sign them. And we knew about the qualifiers coming up for the Japanese players that might be involved, like Kyogo, like Maeda, obviously Rogic. So this is something that Celtic were well aware of. Ange himself has said he's well aware of it, but he wouldn't try and stop the players from representing their countries because it's the highest honour you can have as a footballer. I'm a traditionalist that way. I think Alan said he was as well, that you cannot stop players representing their country. Why would you? And I'm all for it. But I guess it's just, if you're a Celtic supporter, you're thinking Celtic and you're being narrow-minded about it, possibly selfish about it, and you want your best players for what's shaping up to be January and into February before they play Rangers, is shaping up to be every bit as crucial as the December was. It's just passed. So it could be problematic, and then it brings in the wider question: will Celtic ask for the Rangers game to be postponed? We'll see the nuclear fallout from that if that does happen. But the way Ange was talking, he doesn't seem to be wanting to go down that route. But certainly aware that when you sign these players, of the travel involved, especially for international World Cup qualifiers. And it was Alan that gave us a bit of an insight into that about the 3-day thing and stuff like that the last time he was on, which was quite insightful, and it was also educational. And I get that you have to travel, and if players are called up for international duty, you release them. But it is a problem for Celtic, and it's going to be a problem for these qualifiers. But they knew that, and Ange was always preparing for that. And at no point has he said that Celtic would call for a postponement of the Rangers game on February the 2nd. And I think at this moment in time, they will press ahead and operate as is.
I think that's a fair point, and Alan, I'll come to you on it. First of all, I'm in total agreement with Tony that I don't think that the choice of players that we sign should dictate how the fixtures go. You know, we've made those choices and we have to stick with those choices, and the calendar is what the calendar is. But to come to you on that, what do you think of that point? And also, do you think that, you know, we're all very excited with the new targets that Ange is targeting, the Far East where he's been a manager, Australia that's obviously native to him, and talk of him signing some Iranian players, I think was another option which he mentioned in a press conference back in December. Do you think targeting of these markets perhaps has been stifled by this being an ongoing issue for clubs, or do you think it's a bit more simple than that and that people haven't thought to look there from Europe before?
Got it. So just before I go to that, I was devastated that we didn't sign McGree, Laura. I was thinking of you because I knew that you'd be at home thinking here's Tom Rogic and Postecoglou got a new wee mate to play with, to have barbecues around their house, to play fetch, boomerang, and all that sort of stuff. I knew you'd be devastated if you didn't have that other wee mate to play with. So sorry about that.
Alan, there is a first floor window that I'm just about to jump out of after that particular comment, but I'll let you carry on.
sorry, I couldn't resist it. Humor's the best medicine and all that. So a couple of things. Then I think you're absolutely spot on, right? So this shouldn't be the major compelling criteria for why we do or don't sign players. I think what we're seeing and what we're learning actually, and all the great new contacts like Dan that we've made because of signing Japanese players, is that there are actually still, believe it or not, some markets that are underexploited as far as certainly European football is concerned. And European football has traditionally been where the money is, although the MLS is growing and signing quite high-profile players, and we know that some of the Middle Eastern football leagues are growing and obviously having money thrown at them, and even in Japan is like a rising league. But in terms of finding players that are perhaps potentially undervalued, I mean, if Japan are pretty highly ranked. I can't remember exactly where they are ranked in the world, but I'm thinking it's in the 20s somewhere. And we've actually signed 4 players who are of the standard that would get into the national squad for a total of less than 10 million. That's quite astonishing, actually. And I know that Dan's bemoaned the fact that the Japanese seem to let their talent go too cheaply, in his view, and that may well be the case. But for Celtic, that is a great value. So I think there's some market inefficiencies, if I can call them those, that Celtic should continue to exploit, and that should be the more important criteria over and above the disruption caused by international call-ups. I think on the international call-up side, I'm a little bit surprised that these, because I think one of the things that has happened over the last few years, I mean, football is now completely globalized. There's, as I say, very few markets that aren't known about, or that you can't get some data on, or even view a stream of matches from. Now it's fully accessible, all leagues really. Is that they start to harmonise the international calendar around specific international dates, so that World Cup qualifiers all happen at the same time. This seems to be a bit out of cycle compared to the European fixture, so I'm a bit surprised about that. But I think that will always be a risk, and you've got things like the African Cup of Nations happening now, which obviously is their winter. So there'll always be that risk. I think it's something you just have to live with, because I think the benefits would far outweigh those disadvantages, and I think it's only something that Celtic need to spend more effort looking at. I mean, post Brexit, the landscape's changed in terms of where players can be sourced from, and it seems like Scotland has got a particularly loose set of criteria by which players can be brought in. So compared to England, this is so. For example, there's a 15-point maximum you can get if you're assessing a player for their suitability to be granted a work permit. They look at things like, what is the quality of the league they're coming from? Have they progressed in that league in terms of how many appearances, how many international appearances, how many minutes in continental competition, how far did they get in international competition? So you assign points to these things and top them up. Now, in England, you need 10 to 14 points out of 15. we need 15 for a work permit. If you get 10 to 14, there's what's called an exceptions panel that will sit and make a judgment. But in Scotland, that points doesn't apply. It's purely arbitrary, it seems, or discretionary, and we do like discretion in Scottish football. It's discretionary as to who gets referred to the exceptions panel, and it seems like Celtic have taken advantage of that. And the exceptions panel look at two things: are they of the highest caliber? I mean, how fluffy is that? And secondly, will they contribute significantly to the development of the game at the top level in Scotland? Again, it's completely a subjective, fluffy thing. I don't know who's on the exceptions panel. I don't know what criteria really they use to judge those two points. But sorry, Tony.
It used to be that it was 75% of internationals.
Yeah, that's just one of many criteria now. Yeah, I think I listed them all out there. You add up the points, and you got to get to 15 essentially, and then you'll get your work permit. So, what the point I'm trying to make is that Celtic needs to be investing more time and effort in looking at these markets, even if it means bringing in players that they have to fight with the exceptions panel to get over the line.
Yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it than I think we sometimes give it credit for. But to ask you, Alan, I don't know if you covered it, but I'd said to Tony, but Jim Hannaway brings up a point on YouTube. Team is developing well. Squad will be good enough to beat Gers. Worth seeking a postponement though, just to see how it goes. Is that something you agree with, or would you just crack on with the games as they are?
So listen, this is professional sport, right? And you use every single margin you can get, right? And if you think for 1 second that the team across the city would not use every single, not just the law book, but the spirit of the law book to get any advantage they possibly could, then you're joking, right? So if the rules are that Celtic can postpone the game because they have X number of players on international duty, then, and if the manager thinks that he's not going to be able to put out his best team because of that, then you postpone the game. It's as simple as that.
Interesting, Tony. What do you make of that one?
I tend to agree. It's just from what the manager's public utterances have been.
So Tony, can I just come on that, because I think people have taken the wrong. What he said was, and correct me if I'm not remembered this correctly. What he said was he's accepted the fact that the players will be going away on international duty. Yeah. He didn't comment on whether the game would be postponed or not. He just said because if he was wanting it postponed, he might have said it. That's all I'm saying. He hasn't specifically said that he doesn't want it postponed. But I agree with Alan. If Celtic have 3 or more players away on international, why wouldn't you ask for postponement? Because it's perfectly within the rules. You're not doing anything wrong. So Ange wants his strongest team to play against Rangers. Celtic supporters want to see their strongest team to play against Rangers. It could turn out to be one of the pivotal and most crucial games of the season. So if you can spend £100 million and you're worried about not being forfeit and you're getting a game postponed, I'm sorry, then we can postpone the game.
So I think Celtic are perfectly within the rights. As I say, the manager hasn't specifically said that as of yet, as Alan rightfully pointed out. But I think it's something that Celtic, as Alan alluded to there, we need to look at. We'll find out, what is it, 22nd of January?
The squad is 22nd. Yeah, the 22nd is when the squad's announced. The matches are on the 27th. Thursday, 27th, they've got the first game. And then Tuesday, the 1st of February, is the second game. Now, the good news for Celtic is that both games are in Saitama, so there's no additional travelling over and beyond players going to Japan and back again.
The other good thing about it is, I think, is we're talking about, from what Dan Orlowitz was saying, it looks like if Kyogo's going, that means Maeda won't. And the chances of both Hatate and Ideguchi getting called up are slim anyway. So you're talking about potentially only losing 1, maybe 2 players. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Daniel F on YouTube says, I'm sure Neil Doncaster has said there's no more available dates for the fixture. So that might be the case.
The rules, right?
We'll have to find one. They'll have to find one.
Yeah, they'll have to play on a Monday and a Wednesday or something.
Yeah, on Monday, of course. Yeah.
People have had to do that in the past.
Yeah, I think for him to come out and say that there's no available dates when you've got up to 6 months to play the fixture is nonsense. But we'll see how it goes. Thanks everybody for commenting on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you're watching us. Don't forget you can watch a Celtic State of Mind every day between 12:30 and 1:30, as well as our match coverage. And then the State of Mind YouTube channel's got plenty of other content that involves football and other things. So get subscribed and get the bell on to get notified when we go live. There's plenty of content there. Moving on to a slightly different topic, but still related to what we're talking about. Obviously, Riley McGree looks like he is joining Middlesbrough after what looks like a little bit of a battle for his services. It was painted in the media somewhat that this was a massive loss for Celtic, a player that they'd been chasing. Ange came out and basically debunked that, saying it was an opportunity that arose that didn't come through. But he was speaking to Record Sport, I believe it was yesterday, maybe the day before, and I've just want to read out a little bit of what he said. It wasn't really anything too drastic for us. It was just a discussion and a player I know well. And for me, it was interesting proposition, but it didn't work out, which is fine, and we move on. It's an indication for me that this isn't the right place for him, as it works both ways. I only want players who want to be here. I won't try to convince any player to come and sign for this football club. I won't. If they can't see opportunities that exist here, then that's part of the deal for me. The ones we have all signed all wanted to come here. It's an easy decision. Everyone has their own free will to decide what's best for them, but I'm not going to sell this club to anyone on its attributes or virtues. Tony, I'll come to you on that. When I read that, I stood up and I was beating my chest and I was doing everything. A stark contrast to what we had last season, where our previous manager, Neil Lennon, made us aware that there were numerous players in the dressing room who had made their desire to leave known. And here we've got a manager who won't entertain the idea of signing a player who might not want to come here. What do you make of that? Because some people would say, absolutely, no doubt, I'm going to let my heart rule my head. If you don't want to play for Celtic, we don't want you. Some others might say, well, if the quality of the player's good enough, we should try harder to convince them. Where do you stand on that?
In Ange, they trust. The manager says he's not good enough, or the manager says there's no two different narratives have sprung from this, haven't they? That this guy snubbed Celtic and that kind of thing. And Andy said it was a conversation, and from the conversation, he wanted to go elsewhere. He's been unequivocal in that since he came in. He only wants players that play for the team. You say you were beating your chest. You probably weren't the only Celtic supporter that was beating their chest at his comments. It's bluntness to the point of brutal honesty, isn't it? But that's the way he is. He just says it like it is. Riley McGree was a name that came from kind of left field over the past couple of days. But I think the fact that I think some media outlets had said it was done, it was a done deal, that might have upped him a bit, because it was the manager's telling you this was a conversation I had with a guy who, once he came away from that conversation, probably wasn't convinced that he wanted to play for Celtic. So that was it. That's the guy became available. They had a word. He kind of went, hummed and hawed. See, if you don't go like that, and you don't ask how much, you say, where do I sign? That's the kind of conversation Ange wants potential Celtic players to have with him. You come in, you sit down, and it's, hiya, would you like to sign for Celtic? Yeah, where's the pen? That's the kind of players he wants. That's the kind of attitude he wants. That's the kind of attitude we want from our manager. That someone who will respond to the manager. So I'm quite willing to back the manager's judgment on this. Whatever narrative or whatever has been portrayed in the media, the manager has the final say on this. And it was also a bit near the end of that, he was talking about lies and fabrications. I'll let you know, was what he said. So, yeah, if there's something to announce, I'll tell you. If there's players coming to the club, we'll tell you. And Riley McGree isn't coming to the club. We move on. And again, I don't think the manager feels it is any great loss either.
Mm-hmm.
But I think
Well,
he was not particularly, but I think a wee bit disappointed in the player possibly, and the way the agents have conducted themselves over this.
yeah. I think there's plenty there. Helen McCallum agrees. She says Ange takes no crap from any player who's messing the club about. And
More diplomatic than that, you know.
Mike TW10 says, I reckon that's why certain players aren't getting a game. Ange knows they just don't want to be here. So that's speculation, but it's possible. It's possible. Alan, what do you make of those comments? Like I said to Tony, it's easy as a Celtic supporter to be swept up in those comments to think to yourself, yes, this is exactly what I want. I don't want a player to be here. But as we all know, we've had players in the past who are diehard, dyed in the wool, bleed green and white Celtic fans who've played for the club who haven't necessarily been the best players for us. Do you think is there a middle ground somewhere, or is this the attitude that you should be taking towards signing players?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think we're getting used to Postecoglou's style and the fact that, as Tony said, he can't help himself but be completely honest, and I think that's a hugely powerful weapon. He also has a particularly low bullshit threshold, I think, and that again has got to be a good thing because there's a lot of it about in football. I mean, I'm speculating and reading between the lines, but I think his anger at lies and fabrications suggests that there's some people went in really hard on this McGree story. You know, like you say, saying it was over the line, and clearly it wasn't. And I suspect some agents have been playing games around driving up the value of their player and drumming up interest elsewhere. And Celtic are an obvious fit. They're a big name, and you got the Australian mates factor, as we talked about earlier, to kind of embellish the story and give it the little cherry on top. So all kind of makes sense and plays well, etc. But this is a guy who's made a good reputation in the Championship, and a Championship club that's investing and trying to get back up to the Premier League is going to end up signing him. So I think that's really the bottom and top of it. I think with Ange's approach, there's going to be people that we miss out on because football, shock horror, is a pretty nasty game and full of very sort of dubious and dishonest people. And I suspect Ange doesn't attract the time with those people. And so we might miss out on some good players who've got bad actors or bad agents, which is probably not a bad thing, to be honest with you. But but you mentioned about players not wanting to be here. One of the benefits or surprises or learnings I've taken from doing the whole data analysis stuff is it astonishes me continually, and I'll repeat myself endlessly every time I'm on here, probably about this point, which is the gap between what you might think is a top player and what you might perceive as being a sort of middle ground player is actually quite small. In terms of the margins, that they are really tiny in terms of performance metrics. And if you've got somebody who is, in all intents and purposes, a really, really good player who contributes a lot, whose heart isn't in it and doesn't want to be here and is perhaps not playing fully to their abilities because of that unhappiness, then in my view, you're actually better putting in a much inferior player who's going to be trying that, because the margins are so small. So to me, I think Ange gets that intrinsically. I think he understands that, because he's got an incredibly high sense of emotional intelligence, and B, because he's also a data guy, and I think he understands that performance variables are very small between those players. So I don't think, as I say, we'll see a lot of people being signed who are not fully on board, that Ange can't look them in the eye and know that they're 100% committed to the cause, and that's got to be a good thing, even if they're slightly inferior to someone else who may be wavering on some points. But what I want for Celtic is I want a coherent, solid philosophy and process around recruitment. You obviously got to use the eye test. You got to use data, video analysis, profiling, personality analysis, testimonials from people. You've got to look at all of those things, as much information as you can, because when Celtic spend, for every million that Celtic spend is a big investment for a club of our ability to generate income in the market that we're at. So we can't be throwing money away. So it's not a case of just having someone stand in front of Ange and give him the, oh yeah, he's a good guy, and it's not a case of saying, show me your green and white blood. It can't be that. It's just too simplistic. It's too it's too 18th century thinking. Never mind 21st century thinking. You've got to have a proper joined up, scouting approach.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and as you say, well, he's a winner in your book if you see him as a data guy, Alan. That's for sure. Brown Warrior says on YouTube, lessons have been learned over the how debacle by the board, I believe. Ask the question and give them a week to make their mind up and move on if they cannot answer it. That's an interesting point, Tony, because it's something that we talked about last week with the quick signings that we made with the 3 players that we brought in from Japan very early in the window. And something that seems to be carrying on is a stark change in the way that we're doing business and operating. How much of that do you think is down to the board's changing tact based on the way they've been treated by some of the recent candidates? And how much do you think is it Ange sort of overpowering things and putting his point across?
I think you cannot underestimate the manager's contribution here. But I think he's also made it plain that he wants a working relationship with the CEO. Yeah. And he's mentioned Michael Nicholson a couple of times, and he's mentioned the specific relationship that they have. It's pretty cordial, it's pretty friendly, and they're working together. So I think you've got 2 guys on the same page, and I think Ange also knows the parameters of which Celtic operate in, because he said at one point as well that we're not a club that will splash the cash in the January transfer window. But we sort of looked on, and as Alan alluded to there, we haven't necessarily splashed the cash, but we've brought in players and got that old phrase, value for money. So Ange and Michael Nicholson are working in tandem here. They won't necessarily splash the cash unless they think it's someone who can make a valuable contribution to the team, i.e. like Kyogo, when they splashed 4.6 million for him. Ange knew exactly, and he was back then. So I think it's a two-way thing. I think the board are trusting Ange's judgment, and he's putting faith in them to sort of listen to him and make his point. He said earlier maybe I wasn't forceful enough, but he was talking to different people then. He's now talking to Michael Nicholson, and I guess there's real kind of give and take here, isn't there? There seems to be a relationship, and as Alan said there, that there seems to be a thought-out philosophy and plan when we're scouting players, going to conclude deals for players, and the whole kind of network of people coming together and those that are involved in such complicated processes. But I think the manager has a big say, in what's happening in terms of player recruitment. And you could only listen to the manager, can't you? And see, because he's not called it wrong so far, has he? In terms of players. So, and you're excited about all the players that he's brought in. So I think it's there's been a real, as much as last season was a real disconnect from the top, the manager, the players, the supporters. There's been a gradual reconnection, and I think the manager has played a massive, massive part in that at all levels, from himself to the boardroom, from himself to the players, and from himself to the supporters. There's been a real reconnect and a real buy-in from all parties, and there seems to be a lot of harmony there, on and off the park, and long may that continue.
I'm very happy with the way things are going on and off the park this season, and I think everybody is. It's an interesting thing that I think we're going to hopefully reap the benefits of, and it's something that actually I wanted to pose to Alan. It's an interesting thing. It's maybe a bit premature to ask this, but Lee Burgess back at the beginning of the show said, I think longer term we should consider moving Ange into the director of football role. He's shown the qualities needed and could implement his philosophy for years. Alan, what do you make of that? Is that something that that we should consider for him in the longer term, or do you think he's too much of a football man for that to be an option for him?
I would guess the latter. I think he's somebody who wants to be on the training ground, working with the players in the heat of the battle, under pressure. Everything's on him, leader of men. I think the director of football would bore him stupid. And I think he spoke in the week about, I think on he sees his career path as being winning trophies at Celtic, and then eventually, something like another national team job, I think would probably be where he'd want to go to. I mean, he's in his mid-50s now, remember? So, no, so I don't think that's really a goer. But I think what we're seeing now, and I can't emphasize how important this is, we are now seeing a manager driving the recruitment efforts. And if you think we've had, I don't know how many years of lol ball of a self-appointed, director of football, as you mentioned, that role, having an unhealthy, direction set to who gets recruited and not. And it's astonishing in a way that Celtic have been as successful as they have with that model in place. So that's now, those days hopefully are gone. The one caution that I would say is, I keep in my mind the analogy that springs up when I'm looking at what's happening today and the evidence I've got of what's happening today, is I go back to when Gordon Strachan joined. And I'm not saying that Postecoglou and Strachan are the same type of character or anything like that. The analogy that I'm going to make is around their approach to transfer. So when Strachan came in, I don't know if you remember, but he'd spent a couple of years out of football, and he'd been dragging his poor wife around the world watching football matches. And he came back almost with a set of players that he'd scouted. Now, in those days, we're talking 16 years ago now, even Polish internationals like Boric and Zurawski were relatively poorly scouted by today's standards. I mean, nowadays, Polish kids are snapped up by Bundesliga clubs as soon as they can walk, if they've shown any talent, type of thing. But even in those days, Zurawski and Boric were part of a talented Poland team, and were relatively cheap by even by those standards. And obviously, he knew about Nakamura, etc. So he brought in players that he knew because he'd had that experience. And at the moment, if I wanted to take a step back and be a devil's advocate and be a bit cynical, you could say at the moment we're using Ange's contact book and then some bloke in Ireland for kids. And if you wanted to be a cynic, you could say that is our current strategy. Now, that's why what I'm keen to see is that as we move forward into the next transfer window and the one after that, that isn't the case, and that actually this is just the start of a very organised, globally searching scouting network that is using very consistent criteria and methodologies to identify the best talent for Celtic at good value. That's what I want to see, but I still to see the evidence of that. But what I'm wholly encouraged by is that we don't have a guy in a suit telling the manager who to sign, which is a massive step forward.
You're talking about modernisation there, Alan, aren't you?
Well, to me, it's not modern. To me, it's not modern. But it's playing catch up, really, is what I would say.
Yeah, acting like a big club when it comes to these matters.
Well, any club. I mean, a lot of small clubs, so-called small clubs like Brentford, for example, have found competitive advantage in doing this. Yeah. Celtic, as a club who has got access to huge amounts of fans and a worldwide fan base, but very low television and prize money income, should be looking to exploit every single margin they possibly can. We can't afford the best players in the world, but there's no reason why we can't afford the best scouting software, the best data, the best analytics people, the best sports scientists, right? Celtic could afford those things. You could buy 10 of those people for what you'd waste on a top striker, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. AGSC Tech actually says that they were under the impression that Ange has access to the City Group player database. I don't know if such a thing. I don't know if such.
I don't know if that's a secret or not.
I don't know if such.
I'm not saying anything else.
It's not a secret anymore.
I was about to say I don't know if such a thing exists. I don't know if it does. Whether
it's an interesting rumor, isn't it? It's an interesting rumor.
But it is interesting, yeah. And to be honest, like you said, like you were talking about before with the potential postponement of any Rangers match, you've got to use every advantage you have. I don't think there's anybody in the world who doesn't use their contacts that they've built up throughout their career to better their current position and their current ability to do their job. So I don't think even if he is using something like that there is any problem with doing so. Tony, you mentioned modernisation, and that takes us on to a particularly pertinent next subject. A controversial one, by some, but certainly one that's worth discussing. The Scottish or the SPFL have been looking at voting on whether VAR should become a part of the domestic game in Scotland. And according to the Times, although they were sourced by Ewan over at 67 Hail Hail, so thanks for his piece on that this morning, Ewan Davidson. They're talking about any potential vote that was supposed to happen at the start of this year now being delayed till April. With that in mind, Tony, what's your position on VAR? Do you think it's something that would benefit the Scottish game? Do you think it's something that we need? Are we simply lagging behind the rest of world football by not having it? What do you think?
I think it would certainly benefit the Scottish game. Yeah, it comes at a cost, doesn't it? That's the biggest problem, isn't it? That just how much would it cost? But I'm with Alan on these things. If you're going to improve it for the betterment of Scottish football, then you have to bring it in. There's too much at stake now for it not to come in to Scottish football. You are lagging behind. It would progress the game. A lot of people say it will kill the game, but I'd rather take the 2 or 3 minutes to get decisions correct. And it's people hate that stop-start nature of it when VAR's introduced, but got to get decisions correct, because I said there's far too many, especially this season in particular, when you think of what's riding on this season, for both. I mean, let's be honest, it's going to be Celtic and Rangers Celtic are vying for 40 million quid, and it could come down to, Alan talks about margins all the time, but Alan will agree it could come down to margins, Alan, couldn't it, for the season for access to 40 million quid. So why wouldn't he bring something in that would clear a lot of these issues up and make it better for everybody moving forward and progress your game? We can't be constantly lagging behind. You talk about modernisation. Well, if VAR's the way forward, and there's pros and cons to VAR, but I think VAR has to come in.
Alan, it's an interesting one, because I remember watching it when it first came in. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now, down in England, and the way it was being used there was, to me, an absolute atrocity. It was slowing the game down. It was being used far too often. The decisions were taking far too long to be made, and the type of decisions that were being looked at were the wrong ones. I think a turning point for it was Euro 2020 and the subsequent season that's happened. It seems to be getting used a lot more effectively and being a lot less disruptive to the game. If they could bring it in that model and in that form in which it's being used, do you think it would be an advantage to the Scottish game to have it?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I'm not going to sit here and say having more information is going to be a bad thing and help people make better decisions, right? Clearly, that is the case. But I think we have to be well. On the one hand, we need to be cautious around how long it will take to embed and for the processes and for example, to be slick and to work effectively. I mean, rugby has been using VAR for 22 years. It was 2000 that rugby started using VAR. So to me, that means there's a wealth of knowledge and experience to be tapped there in terms of, what are the pitfalls to avoid, what are the accelerators to get us up and running quicker and avoid some of the common mistakes that they made in rugby, for example. Goal line technology and the whole technology around it is all very well established now. They've been doing it in many leagues for a long time. So I would imagine the price point and the cost has been coming down as well. But really, the technology is only as good as the people using it. It's all about designing people, processes around the technology that are effective. That's the key thing. And that's where people fall down. So don't blame all VAR is a set of screens, monitors, wires, and software, right? It's how people use it that's the critical thing, or don't use it effectively. So that's the key thing. How will this be used? What will be the protocols? What will be the procedures for using it? That's the critical thing to get right. And that's where we should be going and talking to all the countries and sports that are using it. Cricket's been using it for a long time, and as I say, accelerate through some of the pitfalls that they found to get to a better set of processes. But sorry.
I was just going to say an example of that would have been the other night, Alan, with Harry Kane's goal. It was disallowed. The VAR, I don't know if you saw it.
I didn't see it. No,
I
don't watch much English football actually.
There was a player on the goal line, but Harry Kane was in front of the defender, wasn't he? And lots of people got confused as to the offside rule because the goalkeeper was in advance of Harry Kane as well. And people were like, he's onside, but he clearly wasn't. And VAR got it spot on.
There's a few things that that are where football is different to rugby. I mean, rugby's rules are quite complicated, and also but where rugby's easier is that the game is all in front of the referee. Whereas with football, he's got to have eyes in the back of his head, like Willie Collum has, and you've got to literally see 360 degrees to be able to catch all the action. And also rugby is a lot more objective around a lot of the rules, whereas football is a way more subjective sport. So how much do I have to be leaning on you before it's a foul? That's a really subjective conversation. What was my intent when the ball hit my arm in the box? You're trying to read somebody's mind, really, in terms of what were they trying to achieve. So you're always going to have that highly subjective nature. And I think two things make it. I think that's one of two things that make it very frustrating for football fans. Okay, one is that you'll never remove that subjectivity and that subjective element from it, and we're just going to have to live with that. And the second thing is, and I hate to say this, but football fans in general don't know the laws of the game. I've said it, but they don't, and I've learned this the hard way. I do a regular column on honest mistakes through this season because I was interested, given what's at. As you said, Tony, 40 million prize fund at the end of it. But people just don't know the laws of the game. And actually I've started, and I'm including me in that, right? When I started looking at the laws of the game, it's no surprise because my God, don't they go on? Isn't there a lot of them? And don't they go on and on and on? It's really hard.
They change frequently as well.
Aye. So it's not an easy thing. It isn't actually easy. I'm not trying to patronize anyone when I say that. It's actually unless you've studied the laws of the game and done a refereeing course, you probably don't, because it is actually quite complicated. So that I think that adds to the frustration. But what I would say is, in Scotland, it's absolutely needed because you've got to help these people. There's a whole wider conversation about refereeing in Scotland that maybe you don't want to get into, but and some people will no doubt say, but you've got the same people using it. And I think that's a valid point, and I think there's a whole conversation to be had about how referees are being recruited, how they're being promoted, who's getting assigned to what game, how they're being performance assessed. There's a whole debate to be had on that as well.
I think the other thing, Tony, as well, is for me, and you can tell me whether you agree with this or not, but I think there was a misconception when VAR came in that it was going to remove debate around refereeing decisions. No. If anything, it just changed what the debate was about. So, I think for me, anyway, it's not going to change the back and forth you have about decisions. It's just going to change who you're blaming for it.
Probably, yeah. I mean, it's like everything else. The referee can, he can go to a monitor and with his own eyes give a decision based on what he sees, what he maybe didn't see in real time. So, ultimately it'll be his decision, won't it? I mean, you have people in his ear telling him, you might want to have a look at that. So at the end of the day, the referee's still got the final say on it, hasn't he?
Mm-hmm. So I think when they brought in VAR in England, I think Mike Riley said that if they reduce the amount of errors by 2%, that was their goal, because you're really looking at, and again, people probably don't appreciate this. Yes, all referees make mistakes, but you're trying to get from 95% to 97%. That's what you're trying to get. That really is we're talking about that level of margin. So but people's eyes and experience and physical abilities allow them to get about 95% of decisions correct. You give them technology, you push that up to 97, 98%. You'll never get to 100%.
I think it was Jock Stein who famously said that the eye sees what it wants to see. Didn't he, when he was talking about certain decisions when it came to refereeing?
We're all inherently biased, Tony, apart from Scottish referees, of course, are not, as we all know.
But am I right in thinking, Alan, there's 17 laws of football, but there's all like B, C's and D's?
Aye, but they go on and on and on. Subsection D, subparagraph 3.
It becomes a Marx Brothers sketch then, doesn't it? The part of the first part and you rip up. Yeah, indeed. But no, I mean, that's the thing. I think ultimately it's going to come down to to that, isn't it? That the referee will make the final decision. And you often see in England, especially, the referees doing that because despite what they're being told in their ear, they want to check for themselves, don't they? I mean, it's human nature; it's natural.
Yeah.
The critical thing is the question that's asked, right? In rugby,
Yeah.
that's the key thing. What is the question that I'm asking of the VAR official? That's the key thing, and that's completely transparent in rugby. And it could be something quite open-ended, like, is there any reason I cannot award this try? So you kind of go back to a certain point, and then he says, was there a forward pass? Was there a knock on? Was somebody in an offside position, etc., etc., etc. But I think that's where football's failing, is we're not transparent about what the VAR is checking and what triggers that check. And I think you have to be transparent about both those things. What triggers a review and what is the question that's asked? And if you can get those two things to be transparent to people, then you can see this consistency in how it's being applied.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think it's one of these things, it will come eventually. I think it's unavoidable. And let's just hope that when it is implemented, they do so in a fair and, balanced manner, as they do with so many things in the Scottish game. So thanks everybody for commenting on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you're listening. We really appreciate it. We've got over 700 of you watching at the moment, and we really enjoy having you all involved in the chat. To close out the show, we've got 15 minutes to go. Tony, I'm going to come to you. First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about, obviously, the decision to allow full houses back at Celtic Park and stadiums around Scotland. I take it I don't really need to ask you whether you think that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, it's common sense, wasn't it? Let's be honest. How many people are sitting there going, "Is it Monday yet? Is it Monday yet? Is it Monday yet?" People love this country. Is just a football-loving nation, regardless of what football team you support. And to be deprived that privilege and honour of going to watch a football team and pleasure, sometimes it's not, but that whole process, the mechanics of going to a football match, it's handed down from generation to generation. That's why we love it. We love the controversy that comes with it, VAR or no VAR. We consume this game. It's just we love it with a passion and in our heart and soul. So to deprive people of that, it was probably more detrimental than anything over the past few weeks. But you can understand why we did it. And now it was a wise decision to bring the break forward. And now we've got to the stage where we can now all enjoy football and we carry out we be responsible, do the health checks and all that, adhere to the protocols. This is the way it should have been operating for many a month. But fans are just, you ask any football fan of any club, when there's no football on, they just miss it so much. It's the camaraderie, it's the social aspect of it. Apart from the actual act of watching a football match, it just stirs the blood. It's just something that we all love, And yeah. I just think that common sense prevailed, and thankfully there's a full house to welcome Scottish football back on Monday night, and it shaping up to be a cracking game for both sets of supporters and both teams. Some nice subplots with Sean Maloney coming back to Celtic Park as a manager, that kind of thing. But it's just joyous to see it back, isn't it? Because all we've done for the past 3 weeks is talk about it anyway. So we'll never tire of talking about it. But we all love watching it, don't we? We all love that, the actual spectacle of being at a football match and watching the drama unfold.
It's a funny thing, because I was watching Liverpool Arsenal last night in the Carabao Cup, and people would call that a much more glamorous brand of football and whatever. I think I speak for everybody watching this when I say, you talked about missing the football. I miss Celtic even when there's other football on. I get far more invested in a Celtic forfeit cup tie than I would in a Real Madrid Barcelona match. Yeah, they're nice to watch, but it's not the same kind of thing. So I'm itching for Monday night to be back, and for anybody watching, you will of course know that we will be doing match coverage that night for as always on Acsom. And for anybody who's wanting a little Celtic fix over the weekend, Andy Rafferty will be at the Celtic B game over the weekend and doing a little bit of pre-match, half-time and post-match coverage of the Celtic B match for us as well. So you can get your little fix over the weekend if you just need a wee something to tide you over. Alan, I'll come to you. Tony touched on it, the subplots with Hibs, the fact that Sean Maloney has come in as manager. He's getting a lot of praise early on before having done very much, but we've had glimpses of the way that he talks about the game, and it seems to do so very intelligently. And he's had a lot of experience as a number two to Martinez at Belgium, and he seems to be very highly thought of. What kind of challenge do you think his Hibs team can pose against us on Monday night?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think just to echo Tony's very passionate and eloquent defence of why fans should be there. Although I think we should just spare a moment of thought for those players who are scared to play in front of large crowds, because it must be upsetting for them. But the thing was, there was no real science behind fans not being at football, really. I mean, the fans are still going to the football. I live in England. I'm in Sheffield, so the fans are still going to the games down here. So I think it was probably an overcautious move, I would put it that way. But if you and I were managing a pandemic, well, actually, if I was managing a pandemic, it would be meetings after work every day and bottles of gin. But there you go. That's just me. But anyway, sorry. What was the question you asked me? Oh yeah, Hibs, right? No, Hibs. I think there's dangers there, right? So any club, as we've seen. Actually, any club that's got a new manager, there tends to be a bit of positivity and a bit of a bounce. I loved wee Sean as a player. He's one of my favourite players. Yeah, because I think you could see he was a thoughtful lad, and I like the fact that he could play in a lot of different positions. That he was as two-footed as a lot of players get, and he was exciting, and he did the exciting stuff and the clever stuff. So I love the wee man, and he speaks very well about football. Now it's going to take him a while to make his mark. I don't see him having a transformational effect on Hibs to the extent that suddenly they're going to be, playing 10 levels above their abilities or anything like that. But clearly, he will have them set up in a way that will be problematic for Celtic. I don't know if he's a particularly defensive coach, so that will be interesting to see. Will he go all out attack? I can't imagine he's somebody who's going to set up like St Mirren were. And actually, that Carabao Cup match last night reminded me of watching Celtic against St Mirren, watching Liverpool fruitlessly launching high balls in the box against three central defenders. You're sort of thinking, yeah, you get paid an awful lot more money than ours do to make such bad decisions. So it made me feel a little bit better actually about that. So I'd be surprised if Maloney is a particularly defensive coach, but on the other hand, international football is very pragmatic, and he's got a lot of experience in coaching and helping Martinez on that. So I don't know. I honestly don't know what we'll get in that regard, but I suspect that we'll see an uptick in their performance. I think even in the cup final, I don't think Celtic actually played very well, but Hibs were really poor. People kind of forget that, and we kind of just remember the fact that we won. And then the game at Easter Road, we won, I think, quite comfortably actually. So I don't know what we're going to get. I suspect they'll be coherent. I suspect they'll be buzzing a bit and be well up for it, and more coherent than they were in the two games that we've played them so far. But certainly, it's going to be a great evening, and just having him there on the other touchline is going to be special.
It is going to be special, and it's going to be strange, because I have to say, as I get older and I realise I'm speaking to commenters and viewers and other people who are much older than me, but I have to say I'm still getting used to this idea that a player I saw come through as a young player and break into the first team is now a distinctly middle-aged manager, but that's the majesty of time, isn't it? It just marches on. Tony, Hibs might be fielding what looks like a particularly different side if you believe some of the rumours in the papers about transfer offers. I think Martin Boyle was subject of a money spinning offer from the Middle East, which Hibs rejected, much to his chagrin. it's a funny time of year, isn't it, to be playing teams, because you don't know, even if they aren't leaving the club, whether they're going to be fielded if they're in the middle of negotiations to leave. Do you think we're going to see, a full strength Hibs team based on those rumours, or do you think it's just going to be a case of business as usual for them?
I think Sean Maloney will play strongest team, won't he? He's looking for a result, and if Sean Maloney has designs of maybe being the Celtic manager one day, a lot of eyes will be on Sean Maloney's team from a Celtic supporters' perspective, just to see the way his team line up. They see the way they play, the style, the philosophy, the approach. And yeah, I think he'll want to mark an impression. I know Alan will maybe have a look at it in terms of an analytical point of view and see things, but you'll be interested in that, Alan, won't you? Just to see the way they shape up and the way they play and their style, So, because I know you do all the stats for all the teams. So, that subplot to me is very interesting. And also, you don't want Sean Maloney doing Celtic any title damage, to be honest. So,
yeah,
but
I think
going on.
Sorry, Tony. I was just going to say, over. To be fair, even when Neil Lennon was there, they actually gave Celtic more trouble than a lot of teams because they played football. Whereas the vast majority of the league play a long ball variant. Hibs traditionally hadn't, and although they came away losing games 4-2 and so forth, they often gave Celtic a lot of problems and created more than most teams do. And I would expect Maloney to go back to a football playing philosophy, which I think suits the players that they do have anyway, better than Jack Ross's more pragmatic style, which I don't think suited the players that well.
I think I've always thought that Hibs were one of those teams that do come out to play. I've always thought that, regardless, as Aaron says, they might lose, but they come out to play football. They never really fit in, and they are one of those teams who traditionally create a lot more than other teams who come to Celtic Park because of the nature of the style that they play, that they actually want to play football. I can't remember seeing a Hibs team sit in, to my knowledge. Maybe, as you say, Jack Ross's team were a bit more pragmatic, but in my history of watching Celtic, Hibs were always a team that came to win or came to play. I certainly came to attack and be entertaining. Never always turned out that way, but
I think they're going to have some issues. I believe McGinn and Porteous are suspended now. Porteous, I'm disappointed is suspended because he's an absolute. I just thought he's a disaster of a defender. So I wish he was playing, to be honest. But McGinn's pretty solid, and I think if Boyle is really being thwarted in his attempts to move, then as we're going back to our previous conversation, an unhappy player is not an effective player. So that's probably good news for Celtic as well.
Yeah, and he's also been linked with Celtic, hasn't he? So, yeah, correct. I just said linked, Alan. I never said
I think Tony. I think the phrase is lies and fabrications.
Yeah. We'll leave it at the sharp intake of breath, Alan. I think that's what we'll do. Tony, I'll come back to you first on Celtic. Let's focus on our own team going forward. What are you hoping to see from them on their return? Obviously, we've got such positive news about returns from injury, and of course, some would suggest that's why we asked for the delay for the break to be brought forward. Nothing to do with the global pandemic or anything like that. But we've obviously got Jota is back from Benfica. Kyogo will have had extra time to come back from that injury that he suffered just before the break. Julian was back in training yesterday, although it's a bit early for him. That's an encouraging sign. I think he played a game behind closed doors, 45 minutes at least anyway. What are you expecting to see from Celtic on Monday? Are we expecting a typical Ange performance right out of the gate, do you think?
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you? I'm particularly interested to see the Japanese contingent. I was to give my starting 11 to the Celtic way today, and I put Hatate and Maeda in the starting 11.
Wow.
You can never second guess Ange, but I think of the three, those two will start. What to say, 2 or 3 ain't bad, so we'll see how it goes. But and I think Gucci might feature at some point. But yeah, I fully expect a high tempo performance from Celtic because they need to come out the block. Every game's a must-win game now. They cannot afford to slip up at all. So you have to go hell for leather. That, and Greg Taylor was speaking to the media yesterday. He said it was the business end of the season, but Celtic will do their talking on the park. That was an Angeism for me.
Yeah,
that came straight from the manager. Say nothing, we'll do our talking on the park, right? It clearly was. It's that laser-like focus. So I think that it's now Christmas has come. They've won the first trophy. They are now thinking, right, let's have a real rip at this. So I fully expect to see a Celtic firing on all cylinders. Whether it pans out or not like that, we'll see. Could come down to the way Hibs play too. But I think it's a really exciting game to come back to.
it really is. Alan, I think Greg Taylor and what Tony touched on there is a good point. The title run-in really begins now, doesn't it?
It does. So what I've observed so far with Ange is that he's 21 days it will have been since we last played. The longer Ange has that squad on the training pitch, the better Celtic will become. And I fully expect to see another step forward in coherence about our attacking and defending patterns and the way that we're playing compared to the last time we saw the team take the pitch, which was with a team full of odds and sods and so forth. So I expect a higher degree of coherence and a higher degree of team performance, really. I hope he doesn't put anyone on the pitch who's not 100% fit, and that we don't risk players who really aren't quite there or available yet. Because we have got so many games now. I expect Celtic to make a right go of the Europa Conference, which means there's potentially going to be a lot of games. Scottish Cup is about to start as well. That's another five rounds there. So I expect us to be firing for all trophies. That's Ange's philosophy very much. You want to win every game. You want to win every trophy that's on offer. But we need to manage the players carefully. And we've had too many players who clearly shouldn't have been on the pitch getting injured. And that is inexcusable and has to stop.
That's certainly an aspect of the team that I hope changes in the second half of the season. I think continuing with this constant worry that we're going to have injuries and we're going to have players dropping like flies is not something that's good for the heart or the blood pressure for the second half of the season. Thanks very much, Alan and Tony, for getting involved. Thanks everybody in the comments for getting involved. But before we go, Chill Pill said at the very beginning of the show, and I'm going to pose this question to Tony, what was the Rio tune you mentioned this morning, Mr. Haggerty? I missed this, so I would like to know what tune you've got in your up your sleeve, because you do like to write a wee ditty from time to time.
There's a song called Ritmo de la Noche, right? And that's the chorus of where the chorus goes Ritmo de la Noche. But I said substitute the words Rio Rihatate. It's a brilliant tune. It's a wee dance tune, and I would like to see the Celtic supporters take that on board. Honestly, it's as catchy as anything. You will now listen to this song and you will not be able to say Rimo de la Noche. You will sing Rio Rihatate. It lends itself to it. Honestly,
I hope he's good. But I mean, I know it's obvious, but I'm sorry, I'm old enough that
I hope he's good.
If we don't take the opportunity to use a Duran Duran song, then I'm going to be really upset.
I just think that's too easy. You know what I mean?
I know it is, but
yeah,
we've got to have options there, guys. We've got to have options, and let's get our priorities in place.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Let's have the song in place before we even see him in a Celtic shirt. Let's get the priorities right. Thanks very much, everybody, for watching. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Tony. It's been a fantastic show today. I've really enjoyed it. And we will see you, as usual, next week for the usual bulletins and for the match coverage for the return of the Hoops on Monday. Thanks again.
Cheers, Laura.
Thanks.